Hi everybody, today we are going to explain some trigonometric problems by using unit circle. Okay, first of all, let's start with unit circle, the definition of unit circle. What is the unit circle? It's a circle centered at the origin, and the radius of this unit circle is 1. What does it mean? Okay, this is a unit circle, and the origin means center of the circle is at the origin, this point 0, 0. And the radius of this circle is 1, means OA is 1. Okay, now as you know, x and y axis we have in the coordinate plane, and the x and y axis divides 4 parts to the coordinate plane. Okay, at the first part means this part, or we may say first quadrant, it's called first quadrant. At the first quadrant, all x values are positive and all y values are positive. What does it mean? When we take a point from first quadrant, for example, 2 and 3, 2 comes from x and 3 comes from y. And these two components, if this point is in the first quadrant, two components must be the positive. Okay, and the second quadrant, this part is the second quadrant. At that quadrant, when we take a point, the first component comes from x axis. And as you know, x axis or x values in the second quadrant, they are negative. And the y values from the second quadrant, they are positive. So when we take a point from second quadrant, for example, point A and B, A is the first component and B is the second component, and A comes from x values. If B is in the second quadrant, A must be negative and B must be positive. Why? Because A comes from x axis, B comes from y axis. The third quadrant, as you know, all the x values are negative and all y values are negative, means x and y values are negative, means when we take a point, for example, point P, A, B, means first component is A, the second component is B, and the point P has two components and they are negative. The fourth quadrant, again, you know, x values, they are positive, and y values from for fourth quadrant, y values are negative. Okay, for example, a point from fourth quadrant, let's say M, A, B, A first component, B second component, and we know that M is in the M is in the fourth quadrant. So A comes from x-axis, positive, y values means B comes from y-axis, so it is negative. Okay, now what's the relation between trigonometry? Now, as you've seen that we have a triangle here, OHA, and A is on the unit circle. Okay, and first of all, we should know counterclockwise and clockwise direction. Counterclockwise direction, the trigonometry is called positive direction. Means when we talk about an angle, x means positive x axis must be the terminal side. What does it mean? If x means this part, positive x axis, if it's terminal side, when you take a point from the unit circle, like A, and then when you combine A and origin OA, Okay, now an angle between OA and X axis is called positive angle, but the terminal side must be X axis, means from X to A. From X to A is a positive direction. Okay, now we have a triangle, right triangle, OHA, and the measure of angle AOH is theta. Now, this point, as you know, this point has a coordinates. Point A, it's in the first quadrant, and A, you know, it's formed by two components. First component comes from x-axis, and the second component comes from y-axis. Now, let's find these components by using trigonometric ratios. Şimdi, by using right triangle OAH, firstly, let's write cosine theta. Okay, what was the cosine theta? Cosine theta is equal to adjacent side of theta divided by hypotenuse. Means adjacent side OH, or we may say A divided by 1 means A. Okay, it means this part is cosine theta. Cosine theta is equal to A. So instead of A, you may write cosine theta. First component will be cosine theta. Okay, now again, by using this triangle, let's write sine ratio, sine of theta. Sine of theta will be the ratio of opposite side and the hypotenuse. Means sine theta is equal to AH over OA, means 1. Sine theta is equal to, what is AH? AH is equal to this distance, means B. So sine theta is equal to AH or B over 1, means sine theta is equal to B. Okay, so instead of B, we may write sine theta. So the coordinates of will be cosine theta and sine theta. Therefore, we say that always by using trigonometry, by using unit circle trigonometry, cosine values comes from x-axis and the sine values comes from y-axis. Okay, now if you have a point, if it's in the first quadrant, first component from x-axis, they are positive, and the second component from y-axis, and it is again positive. So all the cosine values in the first quadrant must be positive, and all the sine values in the first quadrant must be positive again. Okay, what about tangent? Now, again, by using this triangle, let's say the tangent value is equal to opposite side of theta divided by adjacent side of theta, means tangent of theta is equal to AH. What was the AH? B, means this part is sine theta, and divided by OH. What was the OH? It's A, means cosine theta. So tangent theta will be sine theta divided by cosine theta. And sine is positive in the first, cosine is positive in the first, so tangent theta will be positive in the first. Okay, let's look at the second quadrant. Okay, now second quadrant means we have an angle. It's greater than 90 degree and less than 108 degree. Okay, now means from here to this part, okay? This part. Now, this one is negative cosine theta and sine theta. Why it is negative cosine theta? Cosine theta is positive. We said it's A. But in this part, cosine theta comes from x-axis it should be negative. Means so that we should write minus cosine theta here. Minus cosine theta, this value. So it is sine theta always is from y-axis, so it is positive. And then what about tangent theta? Tangent is equal to sine theta divided by cosine theta. Sine theta from a y value is positive. Cosine means the first part, first component from x-axis, it's negative, so tangent theta is negative in the second quadrant. This is the unit circle, and the unit circle helps to know sine of all trigonometric ratios. Okay, the second page. We have an example here. Okay, let's find the sine of the expression. Means what is the sine of 64? What is the sine of cosine of 32 and tangent of 75? Means sine of 64, is it negative or positive? Let's look. Now, first the 64, where it is, it's between 0 and 90 degrees, means 64 is in the first quadrant. Okay, let's take a point P. In the first quadrant, P is on the unit circle, and then 64 degree like that, 64 degree like that, and then this triangle gives the sine and cosine values. Okay, now cosine, or this point, the first component is cosine and the second component is sine, and we know that this is a point, and always in the coordinate plane, first component comes from x axis and the second comes from y axis. So cosine 64 is the first component, so cosine 64 comes from x, so it's positive. Okay, let's say sine 64, sine 64, it is from y axis. So from y axis, sine 64, distance between 0 and a, so sine 64 will be positive in the first quadrant. Okay, now let's look cosine 32. Again, 32, where it is, it's between 0 and 90 degrees, means cosine 32 is in the first quadrant. Okay, you may say that, teacher, we have learned that in the first quadrant, all sine, cosine, and tangent are positive. Okay, you may say directly, this is positive, but why? Why? Again, let's say cosine 32. Okay, now 32 degree like that, and this point is on the unit circle, and this point has a components from x and y. First component from x and second component from y, and always first component gives the cosine values and the second component gives the sine values. So cosine 32 comes from x and sine 32 comes from y axis. So cosine 32 is positive and sine 32 is positive again. Now let's look tangent. Okay, tangent 75. It's again in the first quadrant, means 75 is between 0 and 90 degrees. So we understand that cosine 75 comes from x, means cosine 75 is OA. Cosine 75 is adjacent divided by radius, and this radius is always one, its unit circle. And then cosine 75 is OA, and OA is positive. Okay, it is in the positive part of x-axis. Now, sine 75 is sine 75 in a right triangle OAN. It is opposite side of 75 and hypotenuse, means the ratio of opposite side of 75, and hypotenuse means AN divided by 1 means sine 75 is equal to AN. This is okay. Now in triangle OAN, let's look the tangent value, means tangent of 75. Okay, when we write tangent of 75, okay, it is opposite of 75 divided by adjacent side of 75. So opposite side of 75 is AN, and the adjacent side of 75 is OA. So AN, we said AN is equal to sine of 75, and OA, this part, is equal to cosine of 75. So tangent of 75 will be sine 75 over cosine 75, and sine 75 is positive, cosine 75 is positive, and positive over positive is equal to positive. Okay. From this solution, normally we prove that tangent value is always the ratio of sine and cosine value. It means tangent is equal to sine over cosine, always. Okay, now the new example. Now let's find sine 164, cosine 132, and tangent 115. Okay, they are negative or positive. Let's look. First one is A, sine 164. As you know, 164 is greater than 90 degree and less than 180. So 164 degree is in the second quadrant. Okay, in the second quadrant, we know that in the second quadrant, y values are negative and x values, y values are positive, x values are negative. Okay, now we have 164 degrees, and we are going to check the sine of sine 164. Okay, we said it's in the second quadrant. When you take a point like M, it's in the second quadrant, and the first component, this is important. Everybody, you should know that, and you should memorize that. Cosine values, all the cosine values comes from x-axis, so that x-axis is called cosine x, and all sine values comes from y-axis, so y-axis is called sine axis. Now sine 164, it's a numeric value, and this numeric value comes from y-axis, and at the second quadrant, ordinate means y values are positive, so sine 164 degree is positive, this point. Okay. When we talk about cosine 164 comes from x-axis, and the x values in the second quadrant, they are negative, so cosine 164 must be negative. Okay, now the next page. B is equal to cosine 132. Okay, 132, again it's in the second quadrant, means between 90 degrees and 180 degrees. Okay, always we said that cosine values comes from x-axis, and cosine 130, it's in the second quadrant, and the second quadrant cosine 130 comes from x-axis, so it is negative. Okay, this is the point N in the second quadrant, and it shows the coordinates of N, cosine 132, sine 132. First component is cosine, comes from x-axis, and the x values in the second quadrant negative, so cosine 132 is a negative value. Okay, the next page, tangent. 115. Okay, tangent 115. Firstly, let's check 115. It's in the second quadrant. Okay, if it's in the second quadrant, let's take a point with respect to 115. It's P. Let it be P. Okay, and P formed by two components, as you know. The first one is X component and the second one is Y component. So first component from X and second component from Y axis. Okay, now, and we said that always first component comes from X, means cosine 115 comes from X, so it's negative. And sine 115 means second component comes from Y, so it is positive. Okay, so sine 115 is positive and cosine 115 is negative. And we have learned at the fourth slide, tangent is the ratio of sine and cosine, means tangent theta, theta is an angle. Tangent theta always is equal to sine theta over cosine theta. So tangent 115 degrees is equal to sine over 115 over cosine 115 degrees, means sine is positive, cosine is negative, and the result will be negative. So we may say tangent 115 is a negative value. Okay, at that quadrant, let's remember again, at that quadrant, sine values comes from Y, positive. Cosine values come from X, negative. Tangent values, the ratio of sine and cosine, means the tangent values is equal to Y values, positive values, divided by X values, negative values, always negative in the second quadrant. Tangent of an angle in the second quadrant is always negative. Thank you.